Hello, everyone. Good morning. So I see a lot of you interested in how not to age, which is good because I need you guys to live longer because we need you to keep what you're doing and fight for animals. So my name is Dr. Faraz Harsini. I'm with Allied Scholars for Animal Protection. We are unifying animal advocacy in universities to train the future thought leaders with vegan values, and that includes our initiatives to bring Dr. Greger's teachings to universities so we see more plant-based physicians just like him. So I saw a lot of you up last night drinking, so hopefully after this talk, you can reconsider some of those decisions. So every time you make lifestyle decision, remember that animals need us to live long. And hopefully tonight you are going to be shoving blueberries and broccolis in your mouth as you're networking. So Dr. Greger graduated from Cornell University School of Agriculture and Tufts University School of Medicine. He's a fellow and a founding member of American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's very dear to me because we work with them to bring whole food plant-based diet and lifestyle medicine and incorporate it into medical school so a lot more medical students can be like Dr. Greger. He's also the founder of nutritionfacts.org, and they have over 2,000 videos freely available on health and nutrition. And I'm sure every single person in this room has benefited from that. He's also an accomplished author and speaker. So his books, How Not to Die Cookbook, and How Not to Diet, have been instant New York Times bestsellers. How Not to Die sold over 1 million copies. Can we pause for a second and think about the impacts of that? Over 1 million people read this book, probably lent it to others, talked about it, changed, raised their families that way. Think about how many animals, and human and non-human animals, were saved because of this man. And to make everything even better, all the proceeds from his books and talks go directly to charity. What an amazing person. With that, I just want to say that his talk is going to be close to an hour, so there's going to be a dedicated Q&A session in LA3. So without further ado, please give it up to my friend, Michael.
Because the single greatest risk factor for most of our killer diseases is how old you are, one could argue that the leading cause of death is actually aging. The rate of death increases exponentially for age-related diseases such as heart disease, cancer, stroke, and dementia. So yeah, within the same age bracket, having a high cholesterol can increase your risk of heart disease up to 20-fold, but an 80-year-old may have 500 times the risk of a heart attack compared to a 20-year-old. Now, the reason we focus on cholesterol is because it's a modifiable risk factor. But what if the rate of aging was modifiable too? My inspiration for writing How Not to Age was the consensus document, Interventions to Slow Aging in Humans, compiled by the top researchers of the field, the likes of Longo, Sinclair, Fontana. They were brought together to identify the most promising strategies to combat aging. They identified a list of essential pathways. For example, drugs that can block the hormone IGF-1, or drugs to block the pro-aging enzyme TOR. But I realized, wait, every single one of these could be regulated through diet. That became the opening section of the book. For example, boosting something called autophagy. At any given time, most of our cells are producing and assembling more than 10,000 distinct proteins, each of which can become misfolded or damaged at any time and require a cleanup in aisle 3. That's is where autophagy comes in. From the Greek words for self-eating, it's a housekeeping process by which defective cellular components are broken down and scrapped for spare parts. This doubles as both salvage operation and quality control, renewing our cells in a sort of cellular reset. As one review put it, the janitor is the undercover boss. Self-digestion for lifespan extension, enhanced autophagy delays aging. But unfortunately, our ability to take out the trash declines with age. The drug industry is eager to pharmacologically modulate autophagy to combat aging, but we can do it naturally. Now, one way is through fasting. Unfortunately, autophagy doesn't really maximally ramp up until after a day or two after fasting, which may be too long to go unsupervised. Fasting longer than 24 hours should only be done under medical supervision, preferably in a live-in clinic. This is not just legalistic mumbo-jumbo. For example, your kidneys normally dive into sodium conservation mode during fasting, but should that response break down, you can rapidly develop an electrolyte abnormality that may only manifest with nonspecific symptoms like dizziness or fatigue, which could be easily dismissed before it's too late. Thankfully, there's another way to activate autophagy. You can fast or go fast. Exercise induces autophagy. As one of the researchers said, I've always known exercise was good for you, but when we found out it increases autophagy, I finally got a treadmill. You have to do it enough, though. Autophagy is activated after 60 minutes of moderate intensity exercise like brisk walking, but only 20 minutes fails to move the needle. What about diet? Any foods to avoid? Acrylamide can inhibit autophagy. Acrylamide is a toxin found concentrated in French fries and potato chips. That's formed during the frying process. The fact that high acrylamide exposure is associated with as much as double the risk of premature death would be consistent with an anti-autophagy effect, though diminished lifespans among eaters of fatty, salty snacks isn't exactly a revelation. You can't know if it's cause and effect until you put it to the test. Very nice. Before being asked to eat a bag of potato chips every day for a month, study subjects were given boiled potatoes with the same amount of fat and salt as the chips. Compared with the fatty, salty boiled potatoes, their C-reactive protein levels shot up 50% on the chips, suggesting that chronic ingestion of acrylamide-containing products induces a pro-inflammatory state. However, look, deep frying causes the formation of all manner of foodborne toxicants, so we can't be sure it was the acrylamide. As one of the earliest geriatric medicine textbooks presciently concluded in 1849, frying is an abomination. If you just must have your French fry fix, air frying produces about 90% less acrylamide. Anything that can help? Starving yourself generates discomfort, but there is something that activates autophagy that many people find comforting. Coffee. About 20 studies have followed more than 10 million people over time, and those drinking 3 cups of coffee a day had 13% lower risk of dying from all causes put together. And decaf appears to be just as protective, so it's not the caffeine. Coffee contains more than 1,000 different bioactive components. The polyphenol chlorogenic acid is the most abundant antioxidant in coffee, so that's where researchers started. And indeed, it was found to enhance autophagy in human cells. More than 300 coffees have been tested, and chlorogenic acid levels vary by more than 30-fold. Interestingly, the major contributor to this wide range is Starbucks. with its extremely low antioxidant content, thought to be because they roast their beans so dark they destroy it. Instant coffee seems fine, and brewed has more than espresso. Paper filtered is the best because it traps the cholesterol-raising compounds in coffee, perhaps explaining why those drinking filtered coffee had even lower mortality rates than those drinking unfiltered coffee. Any food components that activate autophagy? SPERMIDINE. The longevity elixir, SPERMIDINE. Don't be put off by the name. Spermidine and its byproduct spermine are actually found throughout the body. When it was later independently discovered in the muscles and brain, they called it musculamine and neurodine until they found out, it's all the same compound, and so naming rights defaulted to the less palatable original. Our body can make it from scratch, but we can also boost levels by eating spermidine-rich foods, which is good news because our spermidine levels tend to decline with age, dropping more than a half by the time we reach our 50s. This decline is seen across the biological spectrum with a notable exception. Naked mole rats, also known by their more cuddly nickname, sand puppy, considered to be a non-aging mammal, perhaps in part because they're able to maintain high spermidine levels throughout their lives, something you also see in human centenarians. Hundreds of men and women in their 40s through 80s were followed for 20 years, and after looking at 146 components of their diets, the single most predictive of longevity was spermidine. High spermidine intake is linked to lower mortality. Those who consumed the most spermidine had a reduced risk of death from all major causes, which is what you'd expect from an anti-aging compound. Induction of autophagy by spermidine promotes longevity. In a database of more than 1,000 life-extending compounds, among the small subset with the fewest side effects, spermidine had the largest documented lifespan extension. This led some to propose that spermidine may be an anti-aging vitamin. I mean, when we're younger, we may be able to make enough, but as we get older, we may need to start ensuring we get enough in our diet as we get older to maintain autophagy into old age. Well, if spermidine is an anti-aging vitamin, where is that vitamin found? Beans are said to have the highest natural amounts. Only here can I get applause for beans. But I compiled a list of the top spermidine sources, and pig pancreas beat out bean burritos for the bronze. Now, a fermented whole soy food called tempeh tops the list, though, along with plain white mushrooms. While some have suggested the genetic engineering of high spermidine crops, we already have this plethora of naturally spermidine-rich foods. The single most concentrated source is wheat germ with 2.5 milligrams in just the 7 grams in a tablespoon. It's also the cheapest source, costing as little as 2 cents per milligram. You can't get a lot of pancreas for 2 cents. Does wheat germ actually do anything? Well, let's randomize people to some dinner rolls and find out. A randomized double-blind pilot with older individuals repeatedly slipped some spermidine in the form of wheat germ baked into bread rolls versus placebo rolls with wheat bran instead. And those with mild dementia improved way beyond all available anti-dementia drug treatments so far. Admittedly, that isn't saying much, but what's the harm of sprinkling a little wheat germ on your food? The latest Alzheimer's drugs don't seem to work at all. All you get for your $56,000 is a dramatically increased risk of swelling or bleeding into your brain. When the FDA approved it anyway, The head of the American Geriatric Society replied, "My head just exploded." Maybe they just got slipped a dose of the drug. Are we trying to figure out the lights before I continue? Somebody, it's the anti-bean lobby, secretly. I could take a question. What are we going to do? Oh. Okay, is that the same light it was before? Check it with the camera, folks. Oh. Okay, do I need to go back and do a paragraph or something? Let's do it. Do we know when we hit the lights? Metallica song. Lars, 95% vegan. Just FYI. Anyway. Bleeding brain? Good memory. Awesome. Okay. Let's go back to some bleeding brain, shall we? Who doesn't want bleeding brain? All right. The latest Alzheimer's, that's not it. The latest Alzheimer's drugs don't appear to work at all. All you get for your $56,000 is a dramatically increased risk of swelling or bleeding into your brain. When the FDA approved it anyway, the head of the American Geriatric Society replied, "My head just exploded." Maybe they got slipped a dose of the drug. So, just to wrap up this section, autophagy is considered the primary system for cleaning the body from the inside out. And we can boost autophagy with aerobic exercise, skipping the fries and chips, drinking coffee, and eating specific foods to reach a target of 20 milligrams of spermidine a day. I offer similar diet and lifestyle takeaways for each of the other 10 anti-aging pathways, but I also want to talk about the other 3 major sections of the book. Part 2 focuses on the diets and lifestyles of the healthiest and longest lived people around the world. Why do some live to be 100 and others not? It's not just a matter of picking better parents. Studies on identical twins suggest that only about 25% of the variation in lifespan is explained by genetics. So what can we do for the majority over which we may have some control? The media loves stories of hard-living centenarians who attribute their longevity to some combination of, lard, vodka, and favorite brand of cigarette, but how do the oldest and healthiest really eat and live? That's what we have the blue zones for. Areas of exceptional longevity around the world where they may have 10 times the rates of those reaching triple digits, named for the color that a demographer used to identify in a kind of global heat map of mortality. What lessons can we learn? The Blue Zones organization distilled findings from over 150 dietary surveys from the world's longest living people to compile a set of 10 food guidelines. The foundation of the Blue Zones food guidelines is making your diet at least 95% plant-based, avoiding highly processed foods, and emphasizing beans as the healthiest source of protein, water as the best beverage, and nuts as the healthiest snack. That's the foundation. The final 5 guidelines are go easy on fish, eliminate eggs/sugar, reduce dairy, and retreat from meat. There are a number of shared Blue Zone lifestyle characteristics: family coherence, avoiding smoking, daily exercise, social engagement, but plant-based nutrition appears to be the principal component alone for accounting about half the difference in lifespan. No surprise, since the number 1 risk factor for death in the United States is the American diet. Unsafe sex is bad. Sedentary lifestyle, bad. Alcohol and drugs, especially tobacco, bad. But cigarettes only kill 500,000 Americans every year, whereas our diet kills many more. We are what we eat, which is good news because it means we have the power. Changing from a more typical diet to a more optimized diet starting at age 20 would be expected to increase the lifespan of women by about 11 years and men by 13 years. The largest life expectancy gains would be made by eating more legumes. In other words, more beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils. So if there's one thing we could eat, legumes for longevity. Hummus for health. Then comes whole grains and nuts and eating less meat. Now, for the few of you who aren't 20 anymore, not to worry, starting eating healthy at age 60 could still add 8 or 9 years onto your lifespan. Even starting as late as age 80 could add years to your life. Changing your health destiny can start tomorrow morning at breakfast. And it doesn't take much. The NIH AARP study is the largest forward-looking study on diet and health, based on its 6 million person-years of observation, replacing just 3% of daily caloric intake from animal protein with plant protein was associated with a 10% decreased risk of overall mortality. Just swapping 3%. Of all the animal protein sources, eggs were the worst. Swapping in 3% of plant protein for egg protein was associated with twice the benefit, 20% lower mortality, having a tofu scramble instead. But does eating healthier actually slow down aging? Randomize hundreds of women to a diet centered around healthy plant foods or exercise or neither. And though the physical activity failed, those in the plant-based dietary intervention group had a significant slowing of biological aging. Of course, it isn't just about adding years to your life, but life to your years. An unhealthy aging index was devised to measure functional impairments, vitality, mental health, physical health, substituting even just 1% of calories from plant protein for animal protein appeared to lead to significantly less deficit accumulation, and substituting 5% may reduce the risk of dying from the greatest deficit of all, dementia. That may help explain why those who don't eat any meat at all may be up to 3 times less likely to become demented. But again, it's not all or nothing. In fact, the worst thing about humanity's diet is neither animal nor vegetable, but mineral. Sodium. Here are the top 5 fatal flaws of our diet. Millions of deaths every year may be attributable to not getting enough whole grains, not eating enough fruit, not enough nuts and seeds, not enough vegetables. But the single deadliest ingredient in humanity's diet is something we get too much of, and that's salt, our number 1 dietary risk factor for death. A recent whopping study, for example, found that those who salted their food at the table at age 50 appeared to have a 2-year lower life expectancy compared to those who didn't. So swapping out the salt shaker for salt-free seasoning or salt substitute could potentially add years to your life. How do we know it's cause and effect? 5 kitchens at a veteran's retirement home were randomized into 2 groups for a few years, offering meals salted either with regular salt or, unbeknownst to them, a 50-50 blend of regular salt, sodium chloride, with a salt substitute like these, potassium chloride. The kind of salt was the only difference between the meals, and cardiovascular disease death rates plummeted about 40% in the folks getting a reduced sodium blend. The new difference in life expectancy between the 2 groups at age 70 was equivalent to that which would have occurred naturally in 14 years, meaning that simply switching to even just half potassium salt, which you wouldn't even be able to taste the difference for, appeared to effectively make people more than a decade younger when it came to the risk of premature death. What do the likes of the Salt Institute have to say about public health recommendations to reduce sodium intake? In testimony before a congressional committee, the presumption that healthier diets would cut healthcare costs was challenged. Indeed, one processed food defender testified healthcare expenditures increase if lifespan is prolonged. If people start eating healthier and living longer, it could be more expensive. Noting if tobacco were banned, the increase in expected lifespan would increase the cost of care of old people. Think how expensive it would be if people started taking care of themselves and didn't conveniently die on time. Ultra-processed foods, often packed with added salt, sugar, and fat, consistently account for more than 50% of our dietary intake. More than half of our diet is junk. Not surprisingly, these foods are associated with an increased risk of dying prematurely, so just cutting back on animal foods isn't enough. Healthy plant-based diets are associated with a significantly lower risk of dying, but unhealthy plant-based diets are not. In the Harvard cohorts, the more you minimize meat, eggs, and dairy, the lower your risk of death falls. But that's only if you're eating healthy plant foods. If you instead just pile on the junk, like chips and soda, you can increase your risk of death overall, even if animal products remain minimized. Same in the Million Veteran Program study. Healthy plant foods reduce their risk of death. But if your idea of a plant-based diet is vegan donuts, you're not doing your body any favors. Same with the risk of cognitive impairment. Only healthy plant-based diets reduce risk. Same with dementia and depression. Same with frailty. Healthy plant-based foods, good. Plant-based junk, bad. That's why Cornell Professor Emeritus of Biochemistry T. Colin Campbell coined the term whole food plant-based diet. As a physician, right? Terms like vegetarian or vegan just tell me what you don't eat. I mean, do you actually eat vegetables? Right? Professor Campbell's physician son and daughter-in-law tried putting a group of vegetarians and vegans on a whole food plant-based diet. In 8 weeks, they dropped 10 pounds, dropped their LDL cholesterol 15 points. In other words, vegans may benefit from eating a little more plant-based too. Now, meat is a problem in terms of lifespan. Eating a burger may cut one's life as short as smoking 2 cigarettes. So if it wouldn't even occur to us to light up before and after lunch, maybe we should choose the bean burrito instead. What about fish? Unfortunately, our oceans have essentially become humanity's sewer. Everything eventually flows into the sea. So the consumption of contaminated seafood has become the main route of human exposure to chemical pollutants. Yes, a variety of foods are affected, but the number one source of DDT? Fish. Number one source of PCBs? Fish. Salmon is the worst when it comes to PCBs, followed by canned tuna. Salmon also has the highest levels of dioxin-like compounds. So on the one hand, fish has long been viewed as a healthy dietary component because of their long-chain omega-3s. But on the other hand, we've so polluted our world that we're now seeing heavy metals, pesticides, flame retardants in fish, forever chemicals, which may explain why, despite their omega-3s, there's been a failure to consistently observe beneficial effects of fish consumption. So if we had a time machine to go back before the Industrial Revolution, that may be one thing, but now we have studies like this, where mice fed farmed salmon fillets with common levels of persistent organic pollutants were found to develop insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, abdominal obesity, fatty liver, chronic low-grade inflammation. So even just background levels of pollutants that might be presumed to be safe could completely counteract the potential benefits of the omega-3s, in particular leading to serious metabolic issues. For mercury, it's more about brain function. Hundreds of thousands of babies born with brain damage every year as a consequence of their mothers consuming mercury-contaminated fish during pregnancy, with the resulting loss of intelligence estimated to cause billions of dollars of lost productivity every year. In the aging literature, you see cases like this. A man with years of progressive memory loss, tentatively diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia. His family and friends assumed he was nearing the end of his life. But a detailed history revealed that he had consumed swordfish once or twice a week. When the fish was removed from his diet, his mercury levels fell, and his memory bounced back. No more dementia. So it seemed he didn't have dementia after all, but rather mercury poisoning from a handful of monthly meals of contaminated fish. You can see the same remarkable reversals with hair loss. Here's a common story. Perimenopausal woman seeks help for hair loss. Blood tests indicate elevated mercury levels, and no wonder, as she had a diet high in tuna. But within 2 months of skipping fish, her hair started to grow back, and eventually her hair regrew completely. So doctors should consider screening for mercury toxicity when they see hair loss, since there's something we can do about it. Instructing patients to reduce fish intake could provide relief of symptoms and uncover dietary habits that may be a source of heavy metal-induced hair loss. Though admittedly, sometimes heavy metal can lead to too much hair. Sorry, no. No. Happy to cover other foods and beverages in the Q&A session afterwards, like what about red wine, what about green tea? But let's move on to part 3. What can we do to preserve our bones, bowels, bladder, and circulation, our hair, hearing, hormone balance, immune function, joint health, minds and our muscles, sex life and skin, teeth, vision, finally, our dignity in death? Let me share a few quick pearls. For example, did you know that 85% of age-related bone fracture risk has nothing to do with bone mineral density? Has just been drilled into our heads by big pharma and a multi-billion-dollar bone density screening industry. Fractures are primarily due to falling, not osteoporosis. So it's the age-related muscle loss and impaired balance that may be breaking most of our bones, which is good news because there's something we can do about it. 7 randomized controlled trials found that strength and balance training can cut fracture rates nearly in half, and that's just during the trial. In the 5 years after this 1-year study ended, those who had previously been randomized to the combined strength and balance group suffered 74% fewer fractures. That's far more effective than osteoporosis drugs like Fosamax that can cause fractures, atypical femoral fractures, in as many as 1 in 300 users. They're called atypical because they occur not after a fall or trauma, but just during routine activities like walking, twisting at the waist, or even just standing still. Right? Thanks to the drug, your femur, your thigh bone, the biggest bone in your body, just cracks in half. Too cruel an irony from a drug that's supposed to protect your bones. This is what it looks like on X-ray. Ouch. After bones, I talk about bowel function in chapter number 2. Randomized constipated diabetics to either cookies containing a tablespoon of ground flaxseed or flax-free placebo cookies for 12 weeks. And not only does the flax improve constipation symptoms, but resulted in 8-pound weight loss over placebo, 25-point lower blood sugars, an astounding drop in hemoglobin A1C, and 17-point lower LDL cholesterol, all for about 10 cents a day of ground flax seeds. For a head-to-head test of flaxseed and psyllium sold as Metamucil, a third cookie group was added with 10 grams of psyllium, and flaxseed beat out the psyllium for constipation, weight, blood sugars, and cholesterol, and it's about 4 times cheaper. Flax seeds were also directly compared to the prescription laxative lactulose and worked even better. Bladder function. The prevalence of overactive bladder syndrome increases with age, reaching about 1 in 3 of us. No wonder bladder-relaxing drugs are a multi-billion-dollar industry, but may only reduce bathroom breaks by a half a pee a day compared to placebo. But a quarter teaspoon a day of dried cranberry powder work nearly 4 times better, about 2 fewer daily trips to the bathroom over placebo, and that's without any of the drug's side effects. Dry mouth, constipation, sedation, impaired cognition, rapid heartbeat, urinary retention, and the visual disturbances that lead nearly 2/3 to stop taking them, whereas cranberries are just tangy. Urinary incontinence is a common problem among older adults, particularly women due to childbirth. Systemic menopausal hormone therapy like Premarin actually makes it worse, though local vaginal estrogen may help. But what works 5 times better than an estrogen cream? Kegel exercises, pelvic floor exercises, as I detail in the section Jacked in the Box. For men, urinary issues are more of an enlarged prostate problem, having to get up multiple times, wee hours of the night. Cranberries to the rescue again. Even just 1/8 of a teaspoon a day of powdered cranberries can significantly improve prostate symptoms. You can buy cranberry powder in bulk at a cost of less than a penny per day. What about saw palmetto, the most common herbal supplement used for prostate symptoms? Based on dozens of randomized controlled trials involving nearly 5,000 men, no clinical benefits. But pumpkin seeds work. More than 1,000 men with prostate symptoms were randomized to either a tablespoon a day of plain pumpkin seed kernels, a proprietary pumpkin seed extract, or placebo. Now, the study was funded by the drug company that made the supplement, but the supplement totally flopped, while the pumpkin seeds themselves worked. Pumpkin seed oil was pitted against the leading drug for hair loss in women, a little less than a quarter teaspoon applied to the scalp once a day versus the dose of the drug, and they both worked, but the drug worked better. Rosemary oil, however, may be more closely matched. 100 balding men were randomized to twice-a-day minoxidil like Rogaine versus a rosemary lotion. Took 6 months, but significant comparable improvements in hair counts in both groups with no significant differences between the two. The rosemary lotion appeared to work as well as the drug. If you want to give it a DIY try, you can pre-mix about 10 drops of rosemary essential oil to each fluid ounce of your favorite lotion and rub a quarter teaspoon onto your scalp twice a day. Cost-wise, that much rosemary oil would come out to be about a penny per week. Let's move from hair highlights to hormones. I touched on how menopausal hormone therapy can increase the risk of urinary incontinence, but that's not all. If 1,000 postmenopausal women take the standard hormone regimen for 10 years, you not only expect 876 extra cases of urinary incontinence that they wouldn't have had otherwise, but 9 more cases of invasive breast cancer, 8 more cases of heart disease, probably 22 more cases of dementia, 21 more cases of gallbladder disease, 9 more strokes, and 21 more blood clots, though not a single partridge nor pear tree. However, hormone therapy is highly effective in decreasing menopausal hot flashes. Is there any way to keep cool without the clots and cancer? In the US, menopausal hot flashes are considered inevitable. But there isn't even a name for hot flash in Japanese. That may be due to their greater consumption of soy foods. Well, you don't really know until you put it to the test. Harvard funded a randomized crossover trial of a half a cup of unsalted soy nuts a day and achieved about a 40 to 45% reduction in hot flashes within 2 weeks compared to the control group. Given that a plant-based diet may also be helpful for managing menopausal symptoms, researchers decided to combine the two, a plant-based diet and whole soybeans. In fact, 2 randomized controlled trials found that plant-based nutrition with a daily half cup of cooked whole soybeans can reduce the number of serious hot flashes by 84 to 88%. Overall, most randomized of the plant-based bean group ended up free of moderate to severe hot flashes compared to about 95% still suffering in the control group. Lots of other things can help. Whole fennel seeds powdered into capsules to pit them against placebo in a double-blind trial significantly improved menopausal symptoms at a dose of just a teaspoon a day. Fenugreek may also help at a dose of 1.5 teaspoons a day, though not as much as hormones, but without the side effects. Though fenugreek can make your pee smell like maple syrup. Sounds like a bonus. The nice thing about studying spices is that, entire servings can be stuffed into pills to pit them against placebo. A quarter teaspoon of black cumin powder a day led to significant improvements in memory and other tests of cognition in 9 weeks compared to placebo. Black sesame seeds, less than a teaspoon a day of ground black sesame seeds stuffed into capsules against placebo, drove down systolic blood pressures by 8 points within a month. If sustained, that alone could decrease the risk of stroke by about a quarter. What else can we powder? Strawberries. Osteoarthritis patients were randomized to 2 ounces of freeze-dried strawberry powder versus a fake strawberry-flavored and colored placebo powder. And compared to placebo, the real strawberry significantly reduced constant pain, intermittent pain, and total knee pain, and improved disability and lowered and overall quality of life. Osteoarthritis is the most frequent cause of disability among older adults, yet how do we treat it? Acetaminophen, Tylenol, is considered the first-line painkiller, but guess what? It doesn't work. I mean, it works, but just not much better than a sugar pill. But at least it's not going to make matters worse, like other things we doctors have cooked up, like steroid injections, which actively worsen joint deterioration and offer no greater pain relief than placebo, or arthroscopic surgery, which may end up tripling our risk of ending up having to get a full knee replacement. I mean, so even if the strawberry study was some total fluke, what's the worst that can happen? Tastier smoothies, right? And less than a quarter of a teaspoon of ground ginger a day can beat out placebo for joint pain. Researchers conclude ginger is to be recommended as a safe drug for these patients, but by drug, they just mean a few pinches of plain, ground ginger you can buy at any store. There was even a study on topical ginger, at least when applied to the scrotum. Paper-thin slices of ginger applied over the inflamed testicles, and researchers were on the ball, healing nearly 3 times faster than the control group. Okay, so far, I've touched on preserving your bones, bowel, bladder, hair, hormones, and joints, but preserving your mind is the largest chapter of the book, as dementia is one of our most pressing public health challenges and the most feared condition of later life. There's a common misconception that, you have no control over whether or not you develop dementia later in life. But the good news is that although Alzheimer's may be incurable, at least it is preventable. There is an emerging consensus that what is good for our hearts is good for our heads, because clogging of the arteries inside our brain with atherosclerotic plaque is thought to play a key role in the development of Alzheimer's dementia. This is what our cerebral arteries should look like: open, clean, allowing blood to flow throughout our brain. This is what atherosclerosis in our head looks like. Clogged with cholesterol, closing off arteries, clamping down on blood flow. What kind of brain arteries do you want in your head? Too much cholesterol in our blood is unanimously recognized to be a risk factor for the development of Alzheimer's disease. Those with a total cholesterol of 225 or more, man, nearly 25 times the odds of ending up with amyloid plaques in their brains 10 to 15 years later. Cholesterol explains the Alzheimer's gene ApoE4, how it ravages the brain. After all, ApoE is the major cholesterol carrier in the brain. LDL cholesterol in those with bad gene variants of ApoE averages about 40 points higher, but switch people to a diet lower in animal fat and diet can trump genetics. This may explain the so-called Nigerian paradox, where they have some of the highest rates of the Alzheimer's gene, but some of the lowest rates of Alzheimer's disease. How is that possible? Genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. The paradox may be explained by their low cholesterol levels, probably due to their diets low in animal fat. Human beings may have evolved to maintain an LDL cholesterol level of around 25, but the average in the Western world is approximately 120. No wonder heart disease is the leading cause of death in high-income countries, and dementia is killer number 2. This helps explain why the so-called Alzheimer's gene is also the single most important gene when it comes to longevity too, which is good news, because even if we've been dealt some bad genetic cards, we can still reshuffle the deck with diet. So, in terms of dietary guidelines for the prevention of Alzheimer's, we should center our diets around vegetables, legumes, fruits, and whole grains. In other words, the dietary pillar of lifestyle medicine, whole food, plant-based nutrition. Or even simpler, plants, and more plants. Any plants in particular? Note that the Loma Linda Alzheimer's Prevention Program singles out berries and greens. When the cognition of hundreds of twins was followed for over a decade, consuming the berry pigments and less than a quarter cup of blueberries a day or a full cup of strawberries was associated with slowed cognitive aging by about 4 years. And nearly all the randomized controlled trials of blueberries and cognitive performance found improvements in at least one brain domain, perhaps because blueberry consumption can improve blood flow to certain critical regions of the brain. Now, the one study that flopped mixed berries with milk. And we know that the addition of milk prevents the artery protective effects of tea and prevents the bump in antioxidants in your bloodstream after eating dark chocolate and impairs the absorption of that autophagy activating compound in coffee. What about mixing berries and cream? The antioxidant activity of blueberries is not just impaired by milk. Check this out. Researchers found that the total antioxidant capacity of our bloodstream, measured 2 different ways, shoots up within an hour of consuming a cup and a half of blueberries with water and remains elevated 5 hours later. With milk, maybe one expects less of a bump, but in fact, they ended up even worse than when they started. After eating a whole cup of blueberries, they ended up with less antioxidant capacity in their body because they ate them with milk. One reason greens may be referred to as an anti-Alzheimer's plant is because dark green leafy vegetables can also improve blood flow in the brain. Randomized older adults to the greens pigments found in a cup a day's worth of cooked kale and see significant improvements in complex attention, cognitive flexibility, and those randomized to just a half cup of kale's worth of the cruciferous compound sulforaphane got significant improvements in processing speed and working memory. Here's the rate of cognitive decline in elderly men and women eating a serving a day of green leafies compared to those only eating greens about once every 10 days. Are you sitting down? The rate of decline among those who consume 1 to 2 servings of greens a day was equivalent of being 11 years younger. So now, are you sitting down to a big salad? Greens come up in chapter after chapter. What's the recommendation for preventing age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness, or even treating it in its earliest stages? Consume a diet high in green leafy vegetables. We're talking 2 to 3 servings a day, so at least greens at every lunch and dinner, with bonus points for sneaking them into breakfast and, say a green smoothie. In fact, blending greens can triple the bioavailability of a critical vision-protecting nutrient. The main reason greens made it into my anti-aging 8, though, is because of the nitrates. And a serving or 2 of cooked greens can slow our resting metabolic rate. For the same reason that a little shot of beet juice enables free divers to hold their breath longer. It improves the efficiency of our mitochondria, the little power plants within our cells, allowing us to effectively extract more energy from each breath. Another dietary intervention with a similar effect on slowing metabolism is caloric restriction, right? The candle that burns half as bright burns twice as long. But instead of starving all the time, we can just eat a big salad. What else can greens do? In the Harvard Nurses' Health Study, the consumption of leafy greens appears to protect against the development of frailty, and when put to the test in a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, the equivalent of 2/3 a cup of spinach led to a significant boost in muscle strength, muscle quality, and muscle mass in older men and women. A single cup of greens worth of vegetable nitrates significantly boosted maximum power and velocity in the quads so much it was functionally equivalent to acutely reversing the effects of several decades of aging. A single cup of cooked greens. Of course, when most people think about preserving muscle mass as you age, they don't think spinach, they think protein. But if you put together all the randomized controlled trials of adding extra protein to the diets of older men and women, you find no evidence that adding protein increases muscle mass or strength. Yeah, but what if you have sarcopenia, excessive age-related muscle loss? Surely then protein helps, right? No significant effect on physical performance or muscle strength. What does work? Exercise. When it comes to age-related muscle loss, it's use it or lose it. Maybe exercise plus protein? No, protein supplementation does not significantly augment the effects of strength training in older adults. In fact, one of my anti-aging 8 is protein restriction. Why do longevity experts like Walter Longo recommend people cut down on protein to live longer? Here's what Luigi Fontana wrote in his book. He's the director of another leading longevity research center. Excess protein won't mass your muscles, but it will accelerate aging. How do you boost the pro-longevity hormone FGF21? Dietary protein restriction. How do you suppress the age-accelerating enzyme IGF-1? You do it through dietary protein restriction. How do you suppress the so-called motor of aging enzyme mTOR? Dietary protein restriction. In fact, protein restriction was the only intervention I could find that could slow down all of the 11 aging pathways, which is good news because it's easier to cut back on protein than to cut back on everything and walk around starving all the time. And it may be even easier than that. Most or all of the benefits of protein restriction may be due to just restricting particular amino acids like methionine. In that case, you could even keep your protein intake the same, but just swap sources from animal proteins like meat to plant-based sources like beans. So, in humans, methionine restriction can be achieved using a predominantly plant-based diet, which makes methionine restriction feasible as a life extension strategy. Of course, drug companies look at the same data and think, what pharmaceuticals can we develop to mimic these dietary interventions? Anything else to maintain muscle mass other than greens and machines? How about cocoa beans? Older men and women randomized to a single tablespoon of regular cocoa powder a day experienced a significant improvement in muscle mass, strength, and all 4 tests of physical performance. And no, the study was not funded by Hershey's. Unfortunately, the tastiest cocoa doesn't work as well. The control groups here were given the same amount of highly Dutched cocoa, alkalized cocoa, where some of the bitter compounds removed are in the Dutching process are the very flavonoids responsible for the benefits. But natural cocoa is so good, it can improve walking performance in those with peripheral artery disease, not only by improving blood flow, but, as muscle biopsies showed, improving mitochondrial activity. This is consistent with improved mitochondrial structure as well in biopsies taken from people's quads, though this study was funded by Hershey's. What else can cocoa do? Increase the circulation in our skin, boosting it 70% within 2 hours after less than a tablespoon. Do that every day, and within 3 months, you end up with significantly improved skin thickness, density, and hydration. Keep it up 6 months, and you can see an improvement in wrinkles, along with an improvement in skin elasticity within 12 weeks, all by making your life a little more chocolatey by adding some natural cocoa powder to your daily diet. I put it in my oatmeal with some water-packed tart cherries for kind of a chocolate-covered cherry sensation every morning. What else can we do for our skin? Well, there's certainly other antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, glycotoxin-free foods. So, when patients inquire about a diet that might contribute to younger-looking skin, evidence supports the recommendation to follow a whole food, plant-based diet. But the most important thing to prevent skin aging is avoiding the sun. Exposure to sunlight may account for up to 90% of visible skin aging. That's why dermatologists agree nothing more important to slow signs of aging than to protect your skin from the sun. Check out this trucker who spent years getting more sun on the left side of his face through the driver's side window, leaving him, kind of looking like a Batman villain. So, the gold standard is considered to be the use of sunscreen in the daytime and quote-unquote retinoids at night. They're talking about a prescription-only form of topical vitamin A, known as all-trans retinoic acid, or tretinoin, sold as Retin A, that has been widely proven to improve skin appearance. The only problem is that it may kill you. Topical tretinoin therapy and all-cause mortality randomized controlled trial had to be stopped early because significantly more people were dying in the retinoic acid group compared to the placebo cream group. So what can we use? Topical niacinamide, also known as nicotinamide, is described as one of the most best-studied anti-aging skin cream ingredients. So again, not saying much, but it has been shown to reduce yellowing, wrinkling, blotchiness, and dark spots in aging facial skin. For example, significantly reducing crow's feet wrinkles around the eyes. This was a split face study in which 64% of the niacinamide side eye wrinkles had moderate or marked improvement compared to 0% on the placebo side eyes. Topical vitamin C offers similar improvements over placebo in wrinkles, sallowness, and skin tone. Unfortunately, vitamin C is unstable in creams. It turns an unsightly brown when it oxidizes. So instead, what the skin care industry has done is use these more stable vitamin C esters or derivatives, but there's no evidence that these compounds have comparable effects, likely because they're poorly absorbed or minimally convert to the active form. But the good news is you can make your own. The 10% solution used in the study retails for a ridiculous $127 an ounce, but you can make a DIY solution your own for more than 2,000 times cheaper by simply buying ascorbic acid in bulk and mixing 3 grams and 30 grams of water for a cost of about a nickel per ounce. Drip a few drops in the palm of your hand and use your fingertips to apply it to the face, neck, and upper chest. Just don't get it into your eyes. And look, you can do the same thing with niacinamide, which can be even more ridiculously priced, but you can buy it in bulk as well for a 5,000% discount. I could go on, and the book certainly does, but let me close by going back to the basics. From the anti-aging journal Rejuvenation Research, finally, a regimen to extend human life expectancy. Was it some exotic new stem cell treatment or gene therapy? No, it was a reference to this Harvard analysis. More than 100,000 men and women would fall for decades. Just a few simple lifestyle behaviors appeared to translate into 12 to 14 years of extra lifespan for the average 50-year-old. Even at age 50, may be able to add an extra dozen years onto your lifespan. Even at age 70, there still could be about 10 years of life left on the table. And if you clean up your diet before age 50, nearly 18 years may be up to grabs based on simple, common sense behaviors. 18 more years of life to make the world a better place. That's the kind of life extension that you can extrapolate from these lab animal experiments. But after decades of research and hundreds of millions of dollars later, efforts to translate those results into humans have largely been in vain. Yet here we are with human data, suggesting dramatic life extension is available to all of us right here, right now. The trillion-dollar anti-aging pill that biotech has been promising us is here. It just must have to be administered in the produce aisle and the gym to be effective. Turning back the clock, not with a drug or DeLorean, but just by eating and living more healthfully. A midlife shift between the ages of 45 and 64, even the barest of minimums. We're talking 5 daily servings of fruits and vegetables, walking even 20 minutes a day, maintaining a healthy weight, and not smoking can result in a substantial reduction in mortality, even in the immediate future. We're talking about a 40% reduced risk of dying in the subsequent 4 years. The researchers conclude that making the necessary changes to adhere to a healthy lifestyle is extremely worthwhile, and middle age is certainly not too late to act. You hold the power. Okay, so I was only able to get to about 100 studies. How Not to Age ended up with over 13,000 citations. So I was only able to cover about 1% of the book. For the other 99%, you'll have to wait for publication, but it is available for pre-order now, and all proceeds I receive from the sales of all my books are donated directly to charity. I just want you and your loved ones to enjoy the longest, healthiest life. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much. There should be an iPad circulating around to sign up for my free email newsletter. If it didn't come to you, no problem. You can click on that other QR code to subscribe. And yeah, I set up a little meetup here, LA3. If you want to ask any questions, I'm going to run over there now, answer your questions, and run to the airport. Hope to see you there.